Today, Forum TV is pleased to sit down for an exclusive interview with a member of parliament for Edmonton Strathcona and a contender for the leadership of the federal New Democratic Party, Heather McPherson. Many know Heather as a fierce human rights advocate with a deep knowledge of international development space, but also a big friend and ally of Ukraine and Ukrainian Canadians. Today, I'm pleased to welcome Heather on Forum TV. Heather, thank you so much for agreeing for an interview with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
There are a lot of questions that I want to talk to you about, but we should probably start with the most important one. I heard that you guys are having a leadership race in the New Democratic Party. So how is that going for you? What are the latest developments on the ground?
Yeah, it's been a really exciting time. I mean, it's a pretty big honor to be able to travel across our country and meet with people from coast to coast to coast. We are getting towards the end. The voting starts on March 9th, and then the actual announcement of who our next leader is will be on March 29th. So we're getting there, but it's been great. It's been really exciting. There's lots of folks that have joined onto our campaign that have expressed a lot of support, and so it's been really nice.
So as you travel Canada through and through, what is the recurring topic that you're hearing from Canadians? What are they mostly interested in and worried about?
No matter where I go, people are deeply, deeply concerned about the cost of living. They're worried about housing. They're worried about, whether their young people in their life are going to be able to afford a house, whether or not they're going to be able to pay their rent and pay their mortgage. They're worried about people in their communities that are living on the streets. So we see that a lot. The healthcare system is another one. We know that healthcare in Canada is in crisis. In particular, my province is taking some real swings at privatizing and making a two-tiered American-style healthcare system. So people are worried about that. They're worried about going to the emergency room and waiting 20 hours, or whether their loved ones will get the care they need. And people are worried about their jobs. Donald Trump is causing such chaos around the world, but that chaos is being felt here. The jobs that Canadians are depending upon are at risk, and we need a federal government that steps up and helps workers across this country.
So tell me a little bit more about your background and why you decided to go for the leadership at this point in time. It's a pretty important step and a historic step in the history of the New Democratic Party. We had election last year. Of course, it didn't go the way you expected it to go. So why did you decide to run, and what are you planning to change on the leadership level?
So I was elected in 2019, but I have to say, growing up, I grew up in Alberta, I grew up in Edmonton, and my dad was a truck driver, my mom was a teacher, and we didn't talk about politics a lot. It wasn't a political family. I don't come from a political dynasty. I come from working class Canadians that believed in taking care of their neighbors, believed in taking care of our communities. And so for me, I look at the wins New Democrats have gotten for Canadians over the years. The fact that we have a public health care system, the workers' rights, the dental care that we were able to achieve in the last parliament, where 6 million Canadians across the country have seen a dentist for the first time. These are real things that New Democrats achieve. But after that April election, with the party so diminished, I'm seeing in the House of Commons, Mark Carney and the Liberals are moving to the right. The Conservatives are, of course, very far right. And no one is standing up for working class Canadians in there. No one is standing up for our healthcare system. No one's standing up to make sure that housing is being dealt with at the scale that we require. It's something I feel quite passionate about, that there's an urgent need for us to rebuild the New Democratic Party. I think that as a member of Parliament, I can do that. I think what I've done in Alberta, being elected 3 times in Alberta, which is not necessarily the easiest seat, and turning that into a really solid seat for the NDP I think it shows I can do this. I can build our party back. And even if you're not a New Democrat, having a strong New Democratic Party in the House of Commons means good things for Canadians.
And I would add to that you won your seat with the highest proportion amongst all elected New Democrats. So you definitely do know how to win elections, and you have a track record on that. Can I just take you a year back to the election time? We talked about the results. They were not what you expected them to be. So what do you attribute that to? Did you have time to reflect on what went wrong?
Oh, of course. And I actually spent a lot of time right after the election talking to New Democrats just to get a sense of how people were feeling, like what we needed to do. And I will say, this election was unique. We had a brand new Liberal leader that came in. He was very shiny. And of course, the threat of Donald Trump caused people to make choices, to vote for things perhaps that they it wasn't their first choice, but they voted for things because they were afraid. But that said, we did not do well as New Democrats in talking to Canadians about the things that matter to Canadians. We need to be reaching out to Canadians across the country and talking about, like, what is a housing policy that is progressive? What is a housing policy that a progressive party is putting forward? How do we envision protecting workers' rights? What does that look like? And so I think we got small. We stopped talking to people about the things that mattered to them, and we stopped going to where people were. And that's the center theme of my campaign, is building a bigger table, welcoming more people in, making sure that every single Canadian in this country who believes in healthcare, in housing, in climate change, in protecting workers, protecting human rights in Canada and around the world, every one of those people should see themselves within our party. They should be comfortable voting for a New Democrat in their riding.
Since we've mentioned human rights and Donald Trump, I knew your predecessor, Linda Duncan. Linda was
Such a delight.
she was a big advocate of Ukraine. We had the pleasure of working together with her on numerous Ukraine-related projects. So what is it about Edmonton Strathcona that makes it one of the most Ukrainian-friendly ridings in the country?
As you can tell by my name, I'm not terribly Ukrainian. Heather McPherson is not the most Ukrainian name. But I did take the lead from Linda. Linda was such a champion for Ukrainian rights. And as soon as I took over as the Member of Parliament in Edmonton Strathcona, I took on the vice chair position within the Parliamentary Friendship Group with the Canada-Ukraine Friendship Group. There's a number of different reasons. Of course, one of them is in Edmonton Strathcona, we have a huge Ukrainian population. I always say in Edmonton, everyone's a little bit Ukrainian.
Sure. We call it Western Ukraine sometimes, yeah.
We all eat Ukrainian food within our homes. We all have friends and family and neighbors that are of Ukrainian heritage. So it was important. This is a representative democracy, and I want to do the best work I can for my constituents, and that meant supporting Ukraine. And then, of course, once the continued illegal invasion by the Russian Federation happened, prior to that, I was already doing that work. But once that happened, we all need to stand up. We all needed to use whatever voice we had to condemn what Putin and the Russian Federation had done and to stand with Ukraine.
I want to go back to that period when the full-scale invasion first happened. You've introduced a motion shortly after the invasion recognizing what the Russians have done in Ukraine as genocide, and you have received unanimous consent on that.
Yeah.
What do you think? Is Canada doing everything possible to support Ukraine? What else can be done, and what would you have done differently?
First of all, I was very proud of that unanimous consent motion. I had conversations with all of the parties to get everybody on board. I had been encouraged to soften my language. I had been asked to change that language, and I was very firm on that because what we are seeing was a genocide. And Canada was one of the very first countries that recognized that, aside from some of the Eastern European countries that were much closer to Ukraine. I don't think Canada is doing all that they can. I do think that we need to step up, especially now at this moment in time when Donald Trump is stepping away from the United States obligations to support Ukraine. I think in terms of our sanction regime, we have put people on that sanction list, but are we enforcing it? Are we ensuring that the oligarchs, the Russian oligarchs, are not still benefiting from the shell companies and all of the different places where they've invested in our country? I think that we should be providing more humanitarian support. I went to Ukraine. I saw what had been done in Irpin and Bucha, other parts of the country. We should be helping demine. One of the most heartbreaking things I saw, I met with some young Ukrainians, 16 years old, who were demining their communities with basically like a stick. These are young people who are doing what they can to help rebuild their country, and we should be supporting that. Canada has a history of doing that work. I think we need to be doing more to make sure that Ukrainian children are coming back to Ukraine, the children that have been stolen by Russia. We should be supporting the ICC and the ICJ investigations and providing the adequate funding that the criminal courts need to do the work we need them to do. And then, of course, we need to provide whatever military support we can. When we hear about the idea of the international world order or the rules-based order, Ukraine is fighting that war for all of us. Ukraine is fighting on the front lines and requires our support.
You've touched upon Donald Trump and his administration taking a step back in terms of supporting Ukraine, and I'm being very generous right now to him. How would you deal with Donald Trump? Because Canada has its own separate
Yeah.
story right now. In our bilateral relations, we're being threatened by the tariffs constantly. There's a lot of uncertainty in the business community. There's a lot of uncertainty in the defense community as well.
Yeah.
Do we treat the United States as our ally? Is it our ally right now? Will it be moving forward? So what do you make of it?
It's chaotic. There's no getting around that. And it's very, very difficult to deal with Donald Trump. What he is doing is so beyond the pale of what we have seen before that I want to be really clear. There is no easy solutions here, but there are things that we should be doing. You look at our economic sovereignty, you look at national sovereignty. One of the best ways that we can protect Canada and protect the Canadian economy is by making sure that we are strong economically. And so that means we need to be building more of our infrastructure. We need to be using Canadian materials. We need to be building with Canadian workers. We should be investing in manufacturing. We should be investing in the infrastructure that we require for a futures-facing economy. We should be making sure that interprovincial trade barriers are reduced so that we have a stronger one Canada economy. Obviously, developing trade relationships with other countries, making sure that we are building those relationships. We have had a dependence on the United States that was unhealthy before Donald Trump. We needed to change that before Donald Trump, and certainly now, certainly with him in power. In terms of defense spending, listen, I think we've got to be very careful about how we manage the northern sovereignty issue, how we make sure that we are protecting our own sovereignty. We will not be able to spend enough militarily to defend in a military attack against the United States. So let's invest in things like diplomacy. Let's invest in Canada playing a meaningful role on peacekeeping and peace building around the world, on international development. Those are things where we have the ability to do that work. I'm a believer. I believe we need to invest more in our military. I do believe that people that are in uniform require salaries that are appropriate for the work we're asking them to do. I do think we need to make sure that they have housing. Right now, people in the military live in really poor housing conditions, and their salaries have not kept up with other sectors. So I think there is a real need for us to invest in that, but we have to do it right. And I do worry a little bit about whether or not this government understands every step of the way. We need to be protecting workers' rights. We need to be putting human rights first, front and center. And we need to be the Canada that I think most Canadians see us as still.
Of course. And can I get your quick comment on the defense industrial strategy that was recently released by the Canadian government? Big spending promised, big difference in Canadian content. Of course, buy Canadian is first, so which means it will likely, if it's going to be implemented, is going to create a number of jobs in Canada as well. So what do you make of it? Do you think that the strategy is achievable?
That strategy is massive. And I have not seen anything that makes me think that this particular government has the capacity to follow through on it. The other concern that I have is that with that sheer amount of money, I'm also looking at things that this government is not investing in. And I can tell you, when I knock doors in my riding, when I talk to Canadians across the country, they are worried about healthcare, they are worried about housing, they are worried about the cost of living. And Mark Carney's government just did this big announcement on a defense spend, but did absolutely nothing to address the national housing crisis. You know, at the same time, we are looking at a situation where Mark Carney is promising about 5,000 homes being built during a national housing crisis. So I have a lot of concerns about that. I have concerns when I see a federal government not investing in the things that people are interested in. When I speak to my constituents and they say housing and they don't say defense strategy. So I think that's a bit of a challenge. I also think if we are looking at our national sovereignty and trying to separate ourselves from the United States, what is being proposed will predominantly increase our relationship with the United States. Any military goods that are produced in Canada will generally be sold to the United States. And frankly, I'm a little concerned about some of the framework in which this government is working. You know, we've seen in the past where light armored vehicles have been sold to Saudi Arabia to be used against innocent civilians. You know, we have seen the government not put human rights at the center of this work, and that's a problem.
Heather, you are asking the membership of your party to support you in the leadership race. For all the viewers of Forum TV, what would you like to tell them? Why are you the right candidate to lead the New Democratic Party in this pivotal time in Canada, We're living through an unprecedented affordability crisis. We're living through unprecedented geopolitical crisis. What makes you the right candidate?
Well, you're right. We are living through a crisis globally, a crisis within our own country. People are really struggling. Canadians are struggling. They're very worried. I've heard it time and time again. And the things that New Democrats have been able in the past to deliver for Canadians, that for me is exactly why we need a strong NDP, why we need a strong New Democratic Party. Even if you're not a supporter of the NDP, surely you can see that a strong public health care system is important, that investment in people, investment in working class Canadians is important. So for me, it's the urgency of that. All of the candidates share the same values. We're all New Democrats. We all want to make a more just, better country for everyone. I have a track record of winning my seat. I have a track record of getting elected. I have a track record of beating Conservatives in some of the hardest places to do that in the country. I can get to work on day one. On day one, I can go back into that House of Commons and start holding the government accountable. I can start rebuilding our party. And I think that's one of the things that I bring. And I think I've shown that this is work that I'm good at and that I can do. So with my team, I'm excited for the opportunity to rebuild our party. I think it's important. I think we need to do that right now.
Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best, Heather. Our guest today was Edmonton Strathcona MP Heather McPherson.